First of all, we're no longer just international volunteers. Half of our volunteers are national volunteers, meaning they serve the United Nations in their own country on a volunteer basis. And that trend, give us another 5 or 10 years, and I'm sure it's going to be 75% of our volunteers, and if not 100% someday. It's not that there's less room for international volunteers. It's just that the nature of development aid, Malcolm mentioned Paris and Accra and all the sustainable development conferences that are happening around the world, including Busan this past week, are leaning towards and developing policies towards national ownership, national capacity building, national. And that's definitely the way we see our program moving. Other important development is our volunteers have gotten a lot older. You're correct. Our average age is 39 years old for our international volunteers. And in the area of peace, and this means all the work we do in humanitarian response, peacekeeping, missions worldwide, crisis preventions, crisis recovery, the average age is 39, and they're mostly international volunteers in those areas, but more and more nationals, as I said. However, I think it's also interesting to note that the average staff member age in humanitarian organizations and peacekeeping is also about 39. So there's not a big difference from what we see. But you do need that maturity. You need the life skills. You need to be able to have a good grasp of everything that's being talked about at this conference in order to go out there and work in the field at that level that we do. We send about 4,000 UN volunteers, 8,000 total every year, but 4,000 to crisis countries every year. But that's an interesting figure because they serve on average 2 to 3 years. I think it's 2.7 years. So they're long assignments. In the old days, let's say when we first started humanitarian work in the early 90s, you know, after the Cold War, many countries broke up and there was a lot of civil war out there in history, and a lot of humanitarian work blossomed and expanded, including UN peacekeeping, which was fairly quiet throughout the entire Cold War. And we sent in a lot of younger people doing frontline direct operations, and that was fine. But over the past 20 years, that area of our work has gone way down. We do very little of that anymore. Partly because the agencies themselves have become much better at delivering humanitarian aid. The agencies we work for are UN agencies like UNHCR, WFP, UN OCHA, Department of Peacekeeping, and they have staff, regular staff to do that immediate work. Plus, we were very, very sloppy at finding people that quickly to get to the earthquake zone within 72 hours, which is something we used to brag about. But we've moved far, far beyond that. We see the biggest role for international and national volunteer assignments in humanitarian being either pre-crisis or preventive or post-crisis and the protracted humanitarian situation that goes on. Then the experts from UNHCR and elsewhere, they can go to the next crisis, but people need to stay on the ground much, much longer, and that's a role that we play. The other element in there is that's where we think our expertise is. And part of this expertise needs to be built, because these days for us it's all about capacity building. We got many examples of that, but one, just several off the top of my head. The earthquake in Pakistan in, I think it was 2005. 15 years earlier, our response would have been working with UN agencies and sending in 20, 30, 40 specialists in water and sanitation, housing, logistics, engineering, whatever. Our response in 2005 to that was to support the government of Pakistan to set up a national volunteer corps. That was the way we supported them. We sent in one international volunteer, did a lot of work from our headquarters in Bonn and our offices in Pakistan, but only one international volunteer who helped the government coordinate, but didn't serve as a coordinator. But we had the expertise in volunteer management. We had the computer systems. We had the tracking systems. We had how you can sort and roster and identify and skill shirt CVs and whatnot to help them put that together. And it still exists today. Other areas, tsunami response. You know, in the earlier days, 20 years ago, we would have sent in hundreds of volunteers to that operation in those countries affected. This time, very, very few internationals and almost all nationals, and all pretty much our efforts were all community-based efforts, which is something that we also promote. Quickly on some of the challenges, because I know we're going over time, but this could relate to AVAC as well. A number of the panelists here talked about safety and security. This is our biggest nightmare. It's the worst part of my job, I can assure you that. Just this past year, we've lost 10 volunteers in my division in violent deaths. And that's difficult. They're making those phone calls to their wives, to their husbands, to their families. The minute you hear about it, you pull out their CV and you see they have children, and that just kills you, crushes you. And it begins to raise very organizational, moral, and ethic questions. Are we doing, is this correct? Should people be volunteering outside Mogadishu or Kabul, where there's bombs every other day, or wherever these things happen? And I've always felt, and each of our directors has successfully felt strongly, that we are the United Nations, and we have people who really want to volunteer to be in these situations, and we therefore have to expect, with a volume of 8,000 or 4,000 working in crisis countries, that sometimes some bad things will happen. Mind you, we have deaths and regular assignments for people serving in Botswana or Barbados, you know, safer countries. So these things can happen, but it is a huge, huge risk that we take. On that note, the big area that I see, and I haven't been that involved in the future of AVAC, I will be going to a conference on the 13th of December. I think some of you are also going there. I think that's an important one. But there are many, many areas and ways young Europeans, and young, I don't know the legal definition of young, but I think it goes up into the 30s, and who can participate. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to deploy people out to the field. There's many things you can do in your own countries to work or to support volunteers on the ground in other countries. And we look forward to working with all of you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And thanks already also for mentioning, indeed, on the 13th of December, we organize in Brussels an information session about the call for proposals for 2012 pilot projects for the European Humanitarian Aid Corps. So organizations that are interested in applying for that at a later stage might want to come and learn about what the different features of the call of next year will be. Because as you know, this year we had already 3 pilots, VSO is one of them, and we will have many more still next year. To precisely what we hear and what the question was about, to really learn about what makes sense, where should we send the volunteers, what should they do, who should recruit them, who should deploy them, who should train them, who is responsible for the security, and so on. So these are a lot of questions, of course, we need to have answers before we set up the final core. So thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, Leon from the EU Red Cross office in Brussels, who of course represents one of the biggest and well-known organization worldwide working in the field of disaster relief and also volunteering. Thank you very much, Leon, and we're looking forward